We have sadly tragic news from Ukraine, where an American journalist has been killed by Russian forces and another journalist has been shot. There were some incorrect things reported about this story, and we're going to correct those. The Jerusalem Post reporting American journalist killed, another wounded by Russian forces near Kyiv. The slain journalist was identified by Ukrainian police as a 51-year-old U.S. citizen and media correspondent. An American journalist was killed and another wounded by Russian forces in Irpin, near the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. The killed journalist was identified by Ukrainian police as Brent Renaud, a 51-year-old journalist, filmmaker, and U.S. citizen, while the Ukrainian authorities initially identified Renaud as the New York Times correspondent. He was not in Ukraine on behalf of the Times. So that's an important detail, and the New York Times also putting this out. This doesn't make it any less tragic, but initially it was reported as a journalist working for the New York Times in Ukraine was shot and killed. It happens not to be true. The New York Times putting out a statement saying, "We are deeply saddened to hear of Brent Renaud's death. Brent was a talented filmmaker who had contributed to the New York Times over the years. Though he had contributed to the Times in the past, most recently 2015, he was not on assignment for any desk at the Times in Ukraine." Early reports that he worked for Times circulated because he was wearing a Times press badge that he had been issued for an assignment many years ago. That's actually really common. I know many journalists and reporters who will just use an old press pass. I've done it as well a decade ago. Sometimes it's just hard to get a new press pass, and you just use an old one, and that's it. You're just identified as press, and that's basically it. So extremely tragic story. And it is getting very, very serious there, including not only do we now have journalists who have been killed, but there is also video, which we're not going to play because it's still very unclear exactly what is allowed in terms of footage on YouTube, as well as on Instagram and Facebook and a lot of the platforms we're on. But there is now footage of from Mariupol of what appears to be, and it has not been contested at this point, Russian tanks just firing upon a civilian apartment building. Now, will the Russians later say, well, we believed it to be a base of operations for, I don't know. They've not said it yet. And the video has not been contested. So this is all getting very ugly. And in the midst of this, we have conflicting reports. On the one hand, there are reports that progress has been made on a potential serious ceasefire and peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. That's good news if it's true. At the same time, there are reports being widely publicized that Vladimir Putin is now looking to escalate the war, seeking military equipment from China. Could both be true? Sure. It continues to move very quickly. And by Wednesday or Thursday, we should have a sense as to whether the reports of the ceasefire talks getting closer is accurate, because typically those don't take more than a few days from what a number of different experts are saying. We will follow it. Let me know on Twitter at @dpacman what you expect for the week ahead.